My name's George Miller. I'm 71 years old, a retired firefighter, and for the first time in decades, I dreaded Christmas. Christmas used to mean family, warmth, laughter, and my late wife, Margaret, baking her famous cinnamon rolls while carols played in the background. But since she passed 3 years ago, the holidays have felt cold. Still, my son David insisted I come over this year. "Dad, it won't be Christmas without you," he said. So I put on my best red sweater, the one Margaret bought me, and drove an hour to David's house. When I arrived, I could hear laughter from inside. His wife, Claire, opened the door and smiled politely, but there was something distant about her. "George, glad you could make it," she said, not quite meeting my eyes. Inside, the table was beautifully set. Turkey, mashed potatoes, cranberry sauce, the works. Everyone was already seated except one empty chair, my usual seat, right beside David. I smiled, thinking maybe, just maybe, tonight would feel like old times. But as I moved to sit down, something unexpected happened. David suddenly pulled the chair away. Before I could react, I lost my balance and fell to the floor with a thud. Everyone froze. My daughter-in-law gasped, and my granddaughter giggled awkwardly. But David just frowned. "Dad," he said coldly, "that seat's for my father-in-law. He's the guest of honor tonight. You can sit over there." He pointed to a small folding chair at the corner of the room, far from the table. I looked at him, speechless. My heart stung more than my back did. "For your father-in-law?" I repeated softly. "David, I'm your father." He didn't answer. The room went silent. I could see Claire's father, Frank, an elegant man in a suit, smirking a little as he sipped his wine. I quietly stood up, brushed off my pants, and sat in the folding chair without another word. The food tasted like ashes in my mouth. Nobody looked at me for the rest of dinner. But that night, I decided I wouldn't just sit quietly anymore. When I left David's house, I knew I was going to change his life forever. And when he woke up the next morning, he had 57 missed calls from me. But not for the reason you think. That night, after leaving my son's house, I sat alone in my truck for nearly an hour, watching the snow fall quietly on the windshield. My hands trembled, not from the cold, but from what I had just felt. Humiliation, rejection, from my own son. I thought of Margaret. She always used to say, "George, never let anger guide your heart, but don't let anyone step on it either." So, instead of crying, I drove home, poured myself a cup of black coffee, and thought. I knew David had changed since his marriage. He'd started a business with his father-in-law, Frank, a proud, arrogant man who never hid his disdain for me. Frank made money, lots of it, and David liked the new lifestyle. He started visiting me less. Then the phone calls stopped. Then came tonight. But I wasn't going to just disappear quietly. I opened an old wooden box Margaret left me. Inside were letters, savings, and something she had written years ago. "A father's love is a gift, but if it's not valued, take it back and give it to those who need it most." And that gave me an idea. The next morning, before sunrise, I started making phone calls. Not to David, but to people he knew. You see,
When I retired from the fire department, I didn't just walk away. I invested part of my pension in David's first startup, $50,000 to be exact. I never asked for it back because I believed in him. But David had forgotten that. So I called his investors, his accountant, even the local paper where I used to volunteer. And every time I left a voicemail, I said the same calm, steady words. This is George Miller, David's father. If you're doing business with him, you should know something important about who he really is. Call me back. By noon, my phone had 57 missed calls, all from David. He was panicking. That evening, there was a loud knock on my door. "Dad, what the hell are you doing?" he shouted as soon as I opened it. His face was red, his voice shaking. "Good evening, David," I said quietly. "Did you have a good Christmas?" "Don't play games with me. You're ruining my reputation." I looked him straight in the eye. "You ruined something far more important, son. Your own family." He froze. His eyes darted away. "You took my chair. You humiliated your own father in front of your children. For what? To impress that man? Frank is not your father. He might be your partner, mentor, whatever you want to call him, but he'll never love you the way I did." He didn't respond. He just stood there, breathing heavily, his anger slowly turning to shame. After a long silence, he whispered, "Dad, I messed up." I nodded. "You did?" He sat down, eyes watering. "I thought you'd embarrass me in front of them. I didn't want to look small." "Son," I said softly, "you don't look small when you honor your father. You look small when you forget where you came from." That broke him. He buried his face in his hands and cried like a boy again. I didn't say a word. I just sat beside him and put my hand on his shoulder. The next morning, I woke up to find him in my kitchen, making breakfast. He looked tired, but peaceful. He said, "I told Claire and Frank I won't tolerate anyone disrespecting you again. You'll always have your seat at our table, Dad." I smiled. "I don't need a seat, son. I just needed your heart back." He nodded, tears in his eyes. "You've got it, Dad. Always." That Christmas, I learned something Margaret already knew. Sometimes love doesn't mean staying silent. Sometimes it means teaching someone what respect truly looks like.
A few days passed after that emotional night. David and I spoke every day. We went for morning walks again, just like we used to when he was a boy. It felt like time was healing something long broken. But then, Frank showed up. It was a Thursday afternoon. The snow was falling lightly when my doorbell rang. I opened it to find Frank standing there, in his black coat, expensive scarf, and that same smug expression. "George," he said curtly, "I think you and I need to talk." I stepped aside silently, motioning for him to come in. He looked around my humble home with clear disgust. "Still living in this place? I thought your son would have moved you into something nicer by now." I smiled politely. "This house has something money can't buy: memories." He scoffed. "You think sentiment pays bills? Let me be clear, old man. I know what you did. You called people. You spread rumors. You almost ruined our business deal." I leaned forward. "No, Frank, I didn't spread rumors. I told the truth, that I invested in my son when no one else believed in him. I simply reminded people who built the foundation he's standing on." His face turned red. "You've made a powerful enemy, George. Don't forget that."
I looked him straight in the eyes. "And you've made a stronger father." He didn't like that. He stormed out, slamming the door behind him. Later that night, David called. "Dad, did Frank come to see you?" "Yes," I said calmly. "He did." There was silence. Then David spoke, his voice filled with disappointment. "Dad, he tried to force me to sign a new contract, one that would cut me out of my own company. When I refused, he threatened to expose me for something I didn't do." I frowned. "What did you do, son?" "Nothing," he said. "But he forged numbers on the financial report. I caught it. I can't let that go." That's when I realized Frank wasn't just arrogant. He was dangerous. "Then don't," I said firmly. "Do the right thing. Stand up for yourself, for your family." The next morning, David went to the office and told the board everything. He showed proof, the fake invoices, the manipulated balance sheets. Frank was furious, but it was too late. The board sided with David. Within hours, Frank was removed as a partner. David came to my house that evening, exhausted but relieved. "Dad, I did it. I stood up for what's right, just like you taught me." I smiled. "You didn't just stand up, son. You reclaimed your name." He hugged me tightly, the kind of hug that says thank you without words. A few days later, on New Year's Eve, David invited me again for dinner. When I arrived, I saw something different. My chair, the same one from before, was sitting proudly at the head of the table with a little note taped to the back. It read, "Reserved for the man who taught me what real strength looks like." Tears welled up in my eyes as everyone stood and clapped. David raised his glass. "To Dad, for being the fire that keeps this family warm." For the first time in years, I felt Margaret's presence again. Like she was smiling somewhere above, whispering, "Told you, George, he'd find his way back." That night, as the clock struck midnight, my phone buzzed. It was a message from David. "Dad, I'll never take your seat again. Not at my table, not in my life." And that's when I knew the lesson was complete.
The new year had begun quietly. Snow still covered the streets, and the Christmas lights were fading one by one. But inside my heart, something had changed. Peace. Real peace. For the first time in years, my son and I were rebuilding, not just a relationship, but trust. But peace never lasts long when pride and greed are involved. A week after Frank was removed from the company, strange things began to happen. David started receiving anonymous emails, threats, warnings. Someone was leaking private business information, contracts, invoices, even family photos. At first, he thought it was a hacker. Then he realized it was Frank. One evening, David came to me, visibly shaken. "Dad, he's trying to ruin me. He's sending false reports to my investors, saying I forged documents that I stole from the company. They're demanding proof I didn't." I looked at him calmly. "Do you still have those copies I told you to keep?" He nodded slowly. "Yes, the ones you said to back up in the safe?" "That's why we keep evidence, son," I said, leaning back in my chair. "You might be young, but you're not alone in this fight. You have me." For the first time, he smiled a little. "You always have a plan, don't you, Dad?" I chuckled. When you've lived as long as I have, you learn to stay one step ahead. The next day, I helped David prepare a file. Every document, every receipt, every email.
We took it straight to the company's board and to the police. The investigation began immediately. Within a week, they found proof. Frank had used company accounts to launder money through fake contractors, and when David caught him, he tried to frame my son to save himself. But the truth has a way of shining through even in the darkest corners. Frank was arrested. The news hit the local paper with the headline, "Local Businessman Exposed for Fraud by His Own Son-in-Law." That night, David came over again. He didn't say a word at first. He just hugged me tightly. "Dad, I couldn't have done this without you." I smiled. That's what fathers are for. We don't always stand in front of our children. Sometimes we stand behind them, making sure they don't fall. He laughed through his tears. "Mom would have been proud of you." I looked at the photo of Margaret on the wall. She'd be proud of both of us. A few days later, David invited me to a company dinner, a celebration of a new beginning. When I arrived, I was shocked. Right at the center of the large table was an empty chair, decorated with a red ribbon and a small framed photo of Margaret beside it. David stood up as I walked in and said to everyone, "This chair represents where it all began, the night my father fell and the moment he rose higher than any of us. This is not just his seat. It's a symbol of family, forgiveness, and strength." Everyone clapped. Some even had tears in their eyes. I sat down not as a forgotten old man, but as a father reborn. After dinner, my granddaughter, Lily, climbed onto my lap and whispered, "Grandpa, Mommy says you're the real hero of the story." I smiled. "No, sweetheart. The real hero is the one who learns from his mistakes." She giggled and hugged me tightly. At that moment, I realized something beautiful. The chair that once made me feel small had become a throne of respect, built not from power, but from love.
It had been 3 quiet months since Frank's arrest. Winter had started to fade, and the first signs of spring were showing. Melting snow, blooming flowers, and a softer sun. David's company was recovering. Business was steady, and our family dinners had become something sacred again. Every Sunday, we'd gather around the big wooden table, share stories, laugh, and remember what truly mattered. For the first time in a long time, life felt normal, peaceful. Until one morning, a letter arrived. The envelope was plain. No return address, no sender name. But the handwriting, I recognized it immediately. Frank. I sat in my living room staring at it for a long time before opening it. The first line made my heart sink. "George, I never thought I'd say this, but you were right." He went on. "I've been in this cell for 71 days now. At night, I lie awake thinking about the man I've become, proud, greedy, and blind. I lost everything, but the worst part, I made your son nearly lose himself too." I read every word slowly. "David is a good man, George, better than me. I can see that now. You raised him with values I never understood. Loyalty, honesty, love. I tried to break that, and I failed. You won." Then the tone shifted. "But I have something you should know. Before my arrest, I had one more account. It's in David's name. I opened it secretly to protect him from what was coming. It contains money, clean money, from my early investments before the fraud. He deserves it. It's my way of saying I'm sorry." At the bottom, there was a final sentence written shakily. "Tell David a man's seat at the table doesn't come from power, but from the people who still want him there." That last line hit me like a wave.
The very phrase that once tore our family apart, seat at the table, had come full circle. I showed the letter to David that evening. He read it silently, tears forming in his eyes. "He wrote this?" he whispered. I nodded. Sometimes life teaches lessons the hard way. David took a deep breath. Should we forgive him? I looked out the window at the setting sun. Forgiveness isn't a gift we give others, son. It's something we give ourselves, so we can move forward without hate. He nodded, understanding more than words could express. A week later, David went to visit Frank in prison. When he came back, he looked different, lighter, freer. "I forgave him, Dad," he said quietly. He cried. He said he hasn't slept peacefully in months. He said he wants to help kids who made the same mistakes he did. I smiled. That's what redemption looks like, son. Not money, not fame, change. Months later, Frank was released on parole. He didn't come to our house, he didn't intrude. But one day, a small package arrived. Inside was a wooden chair, hand-carved, simple, but beautiful. Attached was a note. For George, the man who never fell, even when the world pulled his chair away. That chair now sits in my study. Whenever I feel lonely, I look at it and remember. Sometimes the greatest battles we fight aren't with enemies, but with pride, silence, and ego. And sometimes forgiveness is the only way to win.
Spring was turning into summer, and everything around me felt alive again. Birds singing outside my porch, the smell of roses Margaret once planted filling the air. But even as the world bloomed, I felt a quiet emptiness inside. Something was missing. Something unfinished. One Sunday morning, while cleaning the attic, I stumbled upon a small wooden box. It was tucked behind an old trunk, wrapped in faded lace, Margaret's lace. My heart skipped a beat. Her handwriting was carved on the lid. For George, when the time feels right. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside were 3 things. A sealed envelope labeled "My Will," a small silver key, and a folded letter that began with my name. My dearest George, if you're reading this, it means you've finally forgiven life for taking me away too soon. I've watched over you. I know you've been lonely, but I also know your heart is still kind and strong. I had to pause. My throat tightened. Her handwriting was soft, delicate, familiar. This box holds something more than just my will. It holds my last wish, a wish that involves both you and David. You've always taught our son that respect is earned, not demanded. I want him to learn one more lesson, that love is meant to be shared, even after loss. I unfolded the next page. It was the will. In the will, Margaret had divided everything, her savings, jewelry, keepsakes, equally between David and me. But at the bottom, there was one unexpected line. The key in this box unlocks something that belongs to both of you. Not a house, not money, but a promise. I looked at the key again, puzzled. Then I remembered our small lakeside cabin, the one where we spent every summer when David was a child. It had been locked for years after Margaret passed away. That afternoon, I called David. "Son, I found something of your mother's. We need to go to the cabin." He sounded surprised. "The old one by Clearwater Lake? I haven't been there in years." "Yes," I said. "Bring Lily. I think your mother left us something." The next day, we drove down the winding road surrounded by pine trees until the lake came into view. The water shimmered like glass under the afternoon sun. The cabin looked the same, quiet, covered in dust, but still standing proud. I used the little silver key and turned the lock. It clicked softly, almost like it had been waiting for me. Inside, the smell of old wood and lavender filled the air. On the wall hung a photo, Margaret, young and smiling, holding baby David in her arms. There was also a letter pinned beneath it. To my boys, if you're here, it means you've both found your way back to each other. This cabin is now yours together. George, you built this home with your hands. David, you filled it with laughter. Promise me you'll fill it again, not with silence, but with family. David's eyes welled up. He looked around and whispered, "She knew, didn't she? She knew we'd fall apart and somehow find our way back." I nodded, tears streaming down my face. She always knew. That night we lit a fire in the old fireplace. Lily roasted marshmallows while David played Margaret's favorite song on his phone. As I sat there watching the flames dance, I felt something shift inside me. Like Margaret was there, sitting in her chair by the window, smiling quietly at us. David turned to me and said, "Dad, we're never letting this place go. This is where it all began, and where it all comes back together." I smiled. "That's what your mother wanted." He looked at me for a long moment. "You know, maybe Mom didn't just leave us a cabin. Maybe she left us a second chance." I nodded slowly. A second chance, and the reminder that love never dies. It just changes seats. That night at the cabin felt perfect. Too perfect. The lake shimmered quietly under the moonlight, crickets sang outside, and the smell of burnt marshmallows filled the air. David and Lily had gone to bed early. I sat near the fireplace, sipping tea, staring at Margaret's photograph hanging on the wall. The flames flickered, dancing shadows across the room. Then something strange happened. For a brief moment, I smelled her perfume, that soft, sweet lavender scent I hadn't sensed in years. It wasn't my imagination, it was real. "Margaret?" I whispered. The wind outside howled and the fire crackled louder. The photograph on the wall suddenly tilted slightly to one side. And then I saw it. Written faintly on the back of the frame, almost hidden by dust, were 4 words in her handwriting. "Check under the floor." My heart pounded. I knelt down, moving the rug aside. There was a small wooden panel beneath, one I'd never noticed before. When I pried it open, I found a metal box wrapped in cloth. Inside was a bundle of letters, all addressed to me and David. The first one was dated 15 years ago, the summer before she got sick. "George, if you ever find this, it means the cabin still stands. I wanted to tell you something I never had the courage to say out loud." I took a deep breath and kept reading. "David will go through a season of pride and distance. Don't lose him when that happens. He'll forget who he is, but you'll remind him. And when he finally sits beside you again, you'll both save something much bigger than yourselves." I froze. My heart raced. How could she have known? Just then, I heard a noise, a faint hiss. I turned around and saw smoke seeping from the fireplace. Sparks had leapt onto the old rug. Within seconds, small flames started crawling across the floor. "David!" I shouted. "Get Lily! Fire!" He came running from the bedroom, half asleep but alert. We grabbed the fire extinguisher, blankets, anything we could find. Smoke filled the cabin. Lily was crying. The wooden walls started to crackle, and the photo of Margaret fell to the floor. David threw a wet towel over the rug, smothering the flames while I beat out the sparks near the wall. After what felt like forever, the fire finally died. We sat outside on the porch, coughing, gasping for air. The cabin was half blackened, but still standing. And on the ground, next to the burned spot,
lay the photograph of Margaret, untouched, not a single mark of smoke on it. David stared at it, trembling. "Dad, look, the glass isn't even cracked." I nodded slowly. "She was here. She warned us." He looked confused. "What do you mean?" I showed him the writing on the back. "Check under the floor." She knew, son. Somehow she knew we'd come here, that we'd need to find those letters. David's eyes filled with tears. "It's like she's still protecting us." I smiled faintly. "That's what love does. It never burns out." We spent the rest of the night sitting on the porch, watching the stars fade into morning. David held Lily close, and I held the photograph of Margaret. The sun rose, painting the sky gold, and for a moment it felt like the world was brand new again, like every flame that ever hurt us had only made us stronger. The next day, we began rebuilding the cabin, this time together. Each nail, each board, each laugh we shared was like a piece of Margaret's love coming back to life. And when it was done, we placed her chair right by the window again. This time, it wasn't just a chair. It was a symbol of survival, of family, of forgiveness that refused to die.
The morning after the fire, the cabin smelled of smoke and memory. Ashes still floated in the air like tiny ghosts of what had burned and what had survived. David stood beside me, his arm around Lily, watching as sunlight poured through the broken window. "Dad," he said softly, "what are we going to do with the letters?" I smiled faintly. "We read them, every single one." We sat by the repaired fireplace, the same spot where the flames had nearly consumed everything, and I opened the next letter from Margaret's hidden box. Her handwriting was still graceful, still filled with life. "If you're reading this, it means you both made it through something hard. That's good. You always were stubborn, George, and David, I know you take after him. But now I need you to know the truth about this cabin." David leaned closer. "The truth?" I nodded and continued. "This cabin isn't just a family getaway. It was built on land I inherited from my father, land that's worth much more than you think. I didn't tell you because I wanted you to learn what happiness really means before you ever measured life in money." I froze. Worth more than we think? Inside the envelope was a folded legal document, a land deed. It was dated over 40 years ago. At the bottom, a note in Margaret's handwriting. "This deed belongs to David when he's ready to understand that love comes before pride." David covered his face with his hands. Tears slipped through his fingers. She left this for me?" I nodded. "She knew, son. She always knew you'd lose your way a little. But she trusted you'd find it again." He broke down then, not from sadness, but from something deeper. Regret, love, forgiveness, all mixing together. "Dad," he said quietly, "I don't deserve this." I put a hand on his shoulder. "Maybe not before, but now, after everything, you do." Later that day, we walked down to the edge of the frozen lake. The ice sparkled under the morning sun, and the mountains glowed pink and gold. David took a small wooden chair, Margaret's chair, and placed it by the water's edge. Then he whispered, "This one's for you, Mom." Lily slipped her small hand into mine. "Grandpa," she said,
Do you think Grandma can see us?" I looked at the chair, the lake, the sky, and for just a moment I felt that same lavender scent again. Soft, sweet, familiar. I smiled. "Yes, sweetheart, she's right here." Months later, David restored the cabin completely. He turned it into a place where families could come to heal, to find each other again. He named it Margaret's Haven. Every Christmas, families from all over came to sit together, laugh together, and remind themselves that love is stronger than pride, stronger than pain, and stronger than even death. On our next Christmas together, David pulled my chair closer to his at the dinner table. He smiled and said, "Dad, this seat's yours, always." The whole room went silent for a moment. Then Lily lifted her glass of milk and said, "To Grandmom Margaret, and to second chances." Everyone laughed, and for the first time in years, my heart felt completely full. As the lights twinkled and laughter filled the air, I looked up and whispered, "Merry Christmas, Margaret. You did it. You brought us home." And outside, through the frosted window, a single snowflake drifted down, landing perfectly on the chair by the tree.